So this is my fifth and final talk on Miami's Voice of America, based in Ohio, and what they've been doing and what they're up to as part of a secret society whose emblem is the ability to trace organized crime by the thematic purpose of incidents that we cannot solve. They've created a jigsaw puzzle realm of almost supernatural imagery, things that happen and just occur that seem to fill a slot in our lives, a specific place, a purpose, something that satisfies a symbol or a fear. Now, the fact that they call themselves Voice of America shouldn't be something that fools you. Um, they're really just very gifted at jamming the frequencies. That's what they're doing. They're jamming the frequencies. They're occupying the airwaves. And they're a form of sponsorship. You know, people um, who have followed my work realize by now that the people who shot Serpico also made the movie about him. That's the worst of all possible worlds. You don't get vindication from Hollywood. You just get glamorized for something that he did. So when publishers shoot, it's a form of censorship. And the Voice of America is part of a network that involves a whole publisher's project. And much of this publisher's project involves foreign intrigue. A lot of it is traced to people like Duke Richard, you know, Queen Elizabeth's cousin. And for reasons I plan to go into in my blog, he's a suspect in the disappearance park, the experience theme of John Lennon's masterpiece theater Hoodwink concerning the genocidal programs that we've been confronted with. But one of the things you probably realize is that the jamming of the airwaves coming from Britain involves so-called prog rock. And the prog rockers who jammed the airwaves flooded the airwaves with opium war vibrations to enslave the youth of the 60s, so that if they weren't drafted into Vietnam, they were drafted into human trafficking and used in that way to demoralize the spirit and weaken American youth. You had profoundly abstract BS, codified sometimes for hypnotic cruelty, sadism, violence, and they would cover their tracks by saying they were in Amnesty International or something. And Yes was a good example. Your Time and its news is captured for the Queen to use, dude. I mean, the Voice of America has stopped being the Voice of America, and it's more a Svengali hypnotic that is being run through the circumstances of the Republic in order to spell out the terms of this bad news that they've put together as a venture in, you know, world government, which involves genocide, and in which the American people, who should be irreplaceable, at least our own government, are considered not only expendable, but people who, you know, like this dude, the executive who's turned the White House into a dumpster fire, as someone put it. Doesn't even want to shake hands with anybody. You know, not that we can anymore. They've used behavioral modification on us. But the voice is deeply embedded in the way we think about the things that we're presented with. And it's not the voice of America, it's the voice of a robber baron type of hypnography that the specialists, like the Aldous Huxley of rock and roll, Brian Eno, worked to manipulate the American fashion psyche to go along with this stuff. And so the voice of America has become a form of deep hypnosis and canceling and censorship of our ability to relate to current events to one another and discuss them openly. And of course, there's a lot of agitation. You know, the left dresses up as the right, and the right dresses up at the left, and you can't tell them apart. And it seems like Donald Trump is whispering in one ear or the other in both cases, just to get people provoked and start swinging, you know, so that America doesn't settle. Now, I don't want it to come across I'm 100% enthused by Joe Biden. I mean, he uses John Lennon's "come together" as a catchphrase, and that I can definitely do without, because John Lennon is behind this bullshit. If you look at the Kennedy assassination and the way that he jeered it over and over again in his songs, and you look at the semiotics that came out of King Edward's pull over Hollywood from the 1920s, 1930s, and of course in the Great War, when you had Reagan and Flynn, Errol Flynn, schmoozing with Adolf Hitler and setting up the assassination of John Kennedy, it was perfectly clear that there were too many variables at work on the day they claimed John Lennon was shot to risk failure in an operation they'd worked on for 40 years that they'd been planning. I mean, you can see the whole concept of it. Veronica Lake's "This Gun for Hire," the song in YouTube, now you see it. You know, they encrypted it into Hollywood cinema, and "You Only Live Twice" has that theme. It has a newspaper, you know, the headline of the newspaper is "James Bond Killed," right? And they thought, well, you know, why, you know, fool around with, you know, the idea that media is some kind of like obligation to the truth. We can just pull a fast one, and they proved it with the Warren report, and you know, Robert Penn Warren's book Huey Long, and that's not just a coincidence. They encrypted the whole thing, and they set it all up. And they said, you know, you stick with us because we're better at this than JFK with his hallucinations of peace and so forth. You know, you have to be very wise to be able to see through that stuff and take a clear and present approach to what's going on in our current affairs and in our world and our government, in the hopes that, I mean, if you believe in American principles, you can't really blame American principles. The American people sometimes go wrong. It's not the fault of our principles. And democracy will not perish from the earth just because America falls, if it tragically does. Because democracy harks back to Africa. It's human. People want to agree to stuff. They talk it over and they want to agree. It's what civilized people do. So American principles are perfectly okay, but these weird Svengalis who see everything as a symbol, they don't care what it, if it's like live or, you know, has its own meaning, its own pursuits, its own potentials. It's a symbol. That's all that matters. And they take, you know, full with symbols and play hypnography and stuff, and then they jam the airwaves. And it's not the voice of America, but it is the voice of America, but it's not. It calls itself the voice of America, you know. You can get wise to it. There's nothing stopping you from getting wise to it. It's not against the law to get wise to these assholes.